Uncanny X-Men 184 is called The Past of Future Days, and it is so good. Selene is one of my most favorite X characters of all time, so even just looking at this cover is enough to send me over the moon. She's engaged in a fierce psychic battle with Xavier while surrounded by a raging inferno with Rachel Summers totally unconscious at her feet. Everything about it is just so right. The issue is mostly focused on Rachel trying to acclimate to her new reality. She has traveled into the past from her despot timeline, but the more she sees of things here, the more she suspects that she's been diverted from her actual timeline and that she's not in the right past. She doesn't recognize Storm's Mohawk look, she's shocked to see Professor X standing, and in her world, the Mutant Affairs Control Act only came into fruition as a response to Senator Kelly's assassination, whereas here, it's being pushed forward by Kelly himself. Things get even more complicated for her after Selene picks up her scent and starts hunting her down. The issue also gives more progress on the Mutant Affairs Control Act storyline, and it features the debut of Forge and his infamous power neutralizer device. This issue is such a big win for me. I love the displays of power and the introduction of Selene as a new X-villain. I also think it was interesting that they devoted an entire issue to giving us Rachel's Lost in New York experience, since she really wasn't an established character whatsoever at this point. I'm not a huge fan of Rachel personally, but I commend her character work here, and I don't mind seeing the actual X-team sort of sidelined throughout the issue while she takes center stage. Here are all the highlights for me from Uncanny X-Men number 184.
Rachel Summers.
This issue marks the real introduction of Rachel Summers into the X-Men's lives. She was seen before during the Days of Future Past storyline, but her panel time was kept pretty brief and she didn't really have anything to do with the main X-team itself, so that doesn't really count. Rachel is lost in New York in this issue, and she certainly looks it. She's a bag of malnourished bones, and her guard is up against almost everyone she encounters. She comes from a pretty terrible timeline, so I can't really blame her there, but I'm almost getting secondhand anxiety from just watching her traverse these panels. She's literally running away or being dragged about in almost all of them. She's really out of her element and is having a hard time trusting anyone. It's a far cry from the well-adjusted warrior we know Rachel to be now. Of course, that's a disparate comparison that I love to make though, because it just means that there's been great character development for her over the years. Rachel is actually a super powerhouse in the mutant world. She's got telepathy, telekinesis, and some sort of chronal skimming ability that lets her traverse time in a weird way. She's long been a host for the Phoenix Force, though I don't think she manifested the abilities yet in these early issues. Even Selene is impressed with Rachel's power levels, hence why she seeks her out to become her heir. To impress someone who is thousands of years old and has probably seen it all is no small feat. The problem with having overpowered mutants running around, though, is how can creators put their lives in any sort of peril? Rachel's power can almost help her get out of any jam, like, pretty immediately. In light of having any actual kryptonite or Achilles heel trope, I think the overpowered X-people usually find their weaknesses in their humanity. In Rachel's case for this issue, I think it's her lack of confidence and power control finesse that does her in. She really hasn't been trained to the full extent of her abilities yet. She was too busy surviving in her future to worry about that. So while she does an admirable job of fending off Selene's attack, she's nowhere near Selene's level in terms of finesse and honing. Selene's been hunting and praying for centuries, but Rachel? She might as well be fresh out of the womb here. Even though Rachel isn't a personal favorite of mine, there's no denying how much of an asset she can be to any team. She's definitely a fan favorite character and has been a mainstay of the various X teams for a long time. But even so, why do I get the feeling that creators don't use her effectively? It could be the problem of having too many psychics around. Emma, Jean, Psylocke, and even Professor X all have arguably a higher profile than Rachel does. When it comes to forming teams, it's usually one or two of them who end up in the front and center on some of the main X titles, and tertiary psychics like Rachel are sent to the boonies like X Factor. I mean, I get it. From a power perspective, adding someone like Rachel into a team that's already stacked with formidable psychic energy wouldn't really give the diverse power set that the X teams thrive on. And that's the problem with being overpowered. You've got to also be interesting enough to make the creatives want to find a reason to include you. Otherwise, what good is having the ability to alter reality at your whim if you're just going to be doing it off panel? Something else I found interesting about Rachel in this issue is how the creative team frequently brought up her gender. She tries to escape Selene by running into a club, and she gets so overwhelmed that she can't block out everyone's thoughts. So we get to see some of the fun stuff the party animals are thinking, and in particular, some of the things they're thinking about her. I love anytime we can unscrupulously see inside the common person's mind, especially when it's totally out of context, like all of these thought bubbles are. The only thoughts that we can really trace linearly are the ones about Rachel, and a lot of them seem to be confused about if Rachel's a guy or a girl. It has long been rumored that Rachel was always meant to be a queer character, but it's never been confirmed in any of the comics. I think the closest thing we've ever gotten to any kind of actual confirmation was a super recent issue of X Factor where Polaris teases Rachel about flirting with too many girls. In my opinion, what we see in this issue is Marvel's way of confirming her queer status by using 80s standards. It's under the radar, but I think most things had to be in the 80s because of that damn Comics Code authority. Everything about the X-Men is metaphorical anyway, and so it would go to reason that they'd use this symbolic is she a he or is she a she moment to sort of sow in the seeds of Rachel's sexuality. It never really goes anywhere concrete after this, but as I reread this issue, knowing what I know today, I feel like I'm spotting breadcrumbs in these panels of where Marvel wanted us to take Rachel's journey. It's definitely only a matter of time until Rachel formally comes out as the queer hero she most definitely is.
Selene.
I can't begin to tell you how much of a treat it is for me to be able to talk in depth about Selene. She's my favorite villain in the entire X-Men Rogues gallery. I think one of my very first exposures to her was in the Firestar miniseries. I remember that was one of the first comic sets I ever owned. Even though Selene doesn't play an active role in it, she's integral to the plot as Emma wants to use Firestar to kill her. I just remember being super enamored with Selene's general presence and the attitude she presented. I was always drawn to the darkness, and she felt very much like an evil woman incarnate, an assessment which really isn't too far off the mark. Selene is a psychic vampire, meaning that she feeds off the life forces of others in order to maintain her own life force. But in this issue, she's hunting down Rachel not really to kill her, but more so to force her into becoming her protege. She tries to work her dark influence over Rachel a couple of times, and almost succeeds, but the timely intervention of Professor X and the X-Men interrupt the process. We've actually seen what can happen to a person when Selene successfully brings them over to the dark side. She did this to a few people during the Necrotia storyline, like to Dazzler's half-sister Lois London, aka Mortis, and most notably fan-favorite mutant Blink. Selene totally 180'd Blink's personality and changed her from being a timid little girl who was scared of everything into a vicious killing machine who used her teleportation power to deal some pretty major damage to the X-Men. I think tutelage under Selene would be the best possible way to push your powers to their extremes, but alas, it would probably also come with the sacrifice of your eternal soul. So unfortunately, Selene doesn't get the air she was looking for in this issue, but at least she showed us a good time while she was at it. Selene is a super powerful villain and could really stack up amongst the greats if Marvel really invested in her. Sure, she had Necrotia, but that's one storyline versus villains like Apocalypse and Sinister and Magneto and even the Sentinels, who have been featured in like how many storylines between all of them. I don't think anyone can disagree that those are definitely the go-to X-villains for creators to use, almost to a point that they get overused when there's such great talent like Selene out there just waiting in the shadows to wreak some havoc on her own. It's very rare that we ever get to see Selene use the vast masses of her abilities in one singular issue. She uses her trademark vampirism, and even though it doesn't work against Rachel and only sorta works against Rogue later on, the guy who is helping Rachel is left as nothing but a withered husk after Selene is through with him. Selene also demonstrates her mastery over fire and her formidable psychic prowess in this issue, but definitely the funnest and most underused of her abilities is her control over inanimate objects. It's such a visually appealing power. It's like telekinesis, but with an Animaniac sort of twist. She uses her power to grab Rachel with a wooden floor and to disintegrate various items that Rachel throws at her, and even just to twist Rachel up into a rug. It's a lot of fun being able to use found objects as weapons. It reminds me of hardcore matches from wrestling where the wrestlers get to be super imaginative and use whatever they can find in their battles. Even when she's attacking the X-Men as they arrive, it looks like she's throwing a batch of morning stars at them, but like, who has that many morning stars just laying around their apartment? She must have conjured them up out of psychic energy, or at least molded them out of more of that handy wood panel flooring. I'm not sure if I'm buying Selene's confusion when Xavier confronts her in his astral form, though. It catches her off guard and she stops her attack, thinking that he's a ghost. Like, are you trying to tell me that Selene's never seen an astral projection before? She's a centuries-old external. I'm sure the lady has been around the astral plane a time or two. I also thought it was interesting how Selene managed to override Rogue's power when their bare skin touched each other. Usually when two similar powers come in contact like this, it creates some sort of feedback surge instead of one being able to overtake the other. The only explanation I can think of is that Selene is much more adept at using her absorbing abilities, whereas Rogue is still totally untrained. Selene knew how to navigate through the natural defenses of Rogue and undermine her power, since they essentially share aspects of the same ability. It actually goes to show that if Rogue really wanted to learn how to control her powers, then maybe Selene would be the best tutor for her after all. Overall, it was such a pleasure being able to watch Selene take on the X-Men single-handedly, and I look forward to seeing her do it again.
Nick Damiano.
Oh, Nick. What a tragic fate to befall such a kind and handsome man. He looks like a combination of Colossus and the Beyonder, and I guess if he's gonna go, it's best that he went out in the service of supplying life energy to Selene. He's just a one-off character as far as I know, but he's the calming body that helps Rachel collect herself in this issue. She's a frazzled mess when she meets him. She's about to get kicked out of his club and back out onto the streets, but Nick sees that she's a person in need and offers his help. Cute and generous. What a total package. I think he also serves as the first trustworthy stranger Rachel meets in the past. Befriending the New Mutants or the X-Men is one thing. She already sort of knows them in a way, but this Nick guy is a total unknown. She doesn't know him and he doesn't know her, but what he does know is that this poor girl needs some help and Nick's just the humanitarian to give it to her. He takes her to his gorgeous house and helps her unwind. Something about the panel of Rachel lounging in his bathtub reminds me of that scene from Stardust where Claire Danes is also in the bathtub and becoming super relaxed moments before Michelle Pfeiffer goes to cut out her heart. Same energy, right? I found it a bit curious that Nick mentioned that he specifically did the renovations of his place by himself. He might have been trying to impress Rachel with that line, but what information does that serve for us, the reader? I think the answer comes a bit later when Rachel and Selene are fighting. It mentions that some gas and electrical lines rupture in the floors beneath them, and my only foregone conclusion is that Nick must not be the handyman he thought he was if he installed all these by himself. If Nick did these renovations, then does it not stand to reason that he might have been a bit amateurish in the execution? After the rupture, things quickly burst and the whole place goes up in flames. Yeah, sure, one could argue that Selene's warping of the floor twisted and mangled the electrical lines loose, but come on, it had to be Nick's shoddy workmanship. Otherwise, he's the perfect man, and I can't handle him not being in my life. Selene was only doing him a favor by draining his life force. It's better to go out in the service of a goddess than to have inevitably gotten trapped in a raging inferno caused by your own renovations. I mean, what a way to go.
Forge.
Forge makes his debut in this issue, and he does it in style. He greets Valerie Cooper and Raven Darkholme, aka Mystique, at his lavish Eagle Plaza penthouse and has no qualms in showing off what he's packing. In this case, it's his power neutralizer. Earth is under attack by some dire wraiths in some other comic, and he's been commissioned to create some technology that might help them in the battle. The theory is that this gun will essentially strip any super being of their power, and as we find out later, that's exactly what it does. He's wary about using it though and wants to exercise caution. It hasn't been tested and he knows that there's still due diligence to be done before he can just hand it over to Val and let the government have it. It's actually a very progressive idea of him to not only worry about if it will actually do what he claims it will do, but to also put importance on both the physical and mental strain the effects could have on its victim. I think the government is just focused on results here. They want something that will neutralize powers, but they aren't thinking big picture. There's a whole psychological aspect to consider with a weapon like this, especially if it's going to be used on mutants. Powers are a part of who they are, and without them they're essentially losing a part of themselves. We see lots of both sides of that coin in years later with the House of M storyline, after the Scarlet Witch utters those 3 words and decimates the mutant population. Some people like not having their powers and they thrive, whereas others totally lose it and they see no reason to go on living. It's extremely responsible of Forge to be taking these side effects under consideration as he flushes out the prototype. I mean, it's pretty clear that Val isn't here to talk that kind of shop with him, but at the very least, it validates him creating this device in the name of science and not just as a madman. What I like about Forge is that he's not too stuffy. He's a genius, but it doesn't go to his head. He's wry and charming and very, very flirty. He tries to quip with Val and Raven, but you know those government types. They can't take a joke if their lives depended on it, and in Mystique's case, she kind of felt like it did. Mystique actually goes to the extreme of thinking that she'll have to kill Val and Forge right here and now if he seriously blows her cover as Raven Darkholme. Yikes, this lady has no in-between. Luckily he doesn't get to that, but Forge does make a mental note of Raven's reaction to his joke, which is something I'm sure will be developed later. As far as first impressions go, I think Forge summed his character up nicely. He's a master inventor with a sly wit and a very tutable fashion sense.
The X-Men.
The X-Men aren't in this issue a whole lot. They show up toward the end of Rachel and Selene's fight and they save Rachel from becoming her slave, but other than that, they don't really participate in this story's main plot at all. It's risky business to be giving away an entire issue to someone not even on the main team, but I liked it. It was a nice change of pace and it was fun to see more of the X-Men's world as inhabited by other people, not just them. Even though they were only featured in the latter half of the story, I still got a good sense of who these characters were. It was funny seeing Nightcrawler get entangled in his own costume after Selene manipulates the fabric, and I liked watching Rogue's impetuousness. She dives right in to save him and gets a taste of her own medicine after Selene touches her and starts draining her life force. It's not exactly the skin-to-skin contact Rogue has been looking for all these years, but I'm happy that Rogue at least got a feel for what it's like to be on the other side of her power. She's always the one draining people of their life, and now it was her turn to get a taste of it. It's like if you're gonna dish it out, then you'd gotta be prepared to take it too, and now she knows. Storm is the X-person in this story the briefest, and it's mostly just to help quench the flames of the burning inferno, but I'm happy that we also get more of Storm's ongoing story with the Professor. Charles has taken the lead in this rescue mission, and he was the first responder to help Rachel, but Storm is finally starting to feel the friction of double field leadership. She didn't really seem to mind it when he overstepped her authority back when the team fought the dragon in issue 181, but it's several issues later now, and I think it's starting to finally get to her. Storm isn't feeling petulant about it. It's not like she thinks she's owed leadership of the team that he founded. She more so worries that Xavier is exerting his authority because he thinks that she's inept at it. She worries that he's seeing her as an incompetent leader, and so now that he can participate in missions, he's stepping up to correct the situation. We know that's not the case and that he's just stuck in a habit, but Storm doesn't know that yet, and it's playing on her confidence. The two of them still haven't sat down to have that awkward chat about who's doing what out on the field, and I can just tell that it's going to get worse and worse out there for both of them until they finally do.
Panels.
Here are some of the cute or funny or clever or cool little mini moments that I enjoyed from this issue.
5.
We've all felt the wrath of a coat check lady at one point or another in our lives. I remember once I had to flirt with one just to get my coat back, and it was, just so cringy. At the end of the night, we are all subject to her mercy, and this coat check lady isn't letting Rachel go without paying that $2.50.
4.
Is there anything more pure than Rachel being so stoked to drink orange juice that her hands are quivering with excitement and she spills some? Judging by Nick's physique, I'm sure it's nothing but the most organic of juices too, so calm down, Rachel, and drink up. This stuff can't come cheap.
3.
I know Rachel probably had to scavenge and pilfer in order to survive in her future, but snooping around in the modern day timeline is seen as rude, girl. Still, it's nice to know that Nick is stacked with essentials. I see Tylenol, Vaseline, Ban, probably a few bottles of pomade and hair gel in there too.
2.
This is a really cool panel that does a good job of embodying the confusion Rachel's feeling, but it's also creepy as hell seeing that tiny echo of Selene's voice amongst the sea of thoughts. Her subtle "Rachel" is enough to send Rachel off the deep end, and it doesn't look like any of the other thoughts were planning on being any kinder to her either. There's an issue of X-Men Legacy that does a good job of this too. It's after Rogue absorbs the Cuckoo's psychic ability and she can't really turn it off. Then somewhere within the many mutants of Utopia, she hears someone thinking out loud about how cute she is. I don't think we ever resolve that little dangler and find out who it was, but my money's on it being Cannonball, because double your southern fun.
1.
My favorite panel in this issue is watching Selene turn random furniture to dust. I just think it's hella cool, though if Nick's cleaning service were around on that night, I'm sure they'd have had a fit. My favorite noise lettering in this issue is Rachel scuffing down the street. She's dragging her feet as she meanders around New York rather aimlessly, and I can totally feel her sense of lostness. I know I've scuffed many a shoe to death in the past, so I can only hope that Rachel doesn't turn this into a habit or she'll be shoeless by dawn.
Fashion.
There is only one clear winner in the fashion scene for this issue, and it's the maker himself, Forge. If you're going to debut, then debut in style, and that's exactly what Forge did. Let's break it down. He's wearing a Hamburglar-esque polo, which I'm not totally crazy about, but the fact that the collar is popped up so high is its saving grace for me. That is an intentional pop, and he is the man for doing it. The shirt is tucked into the true creme de la creme of this attire, which is of course the booty shorts. It's athleisure, but it's also sex appeal, and he is flaunting those gams like he's ready to get arrested. Even his white sneakers and white pulled-up socks are great. The whole look is such a complete masterpiece. He looks like he's just coming back from the golf course, but if you look closely, that's not a 9-iron in his hand, but instead it's some sort of diamond-tipped pimp cane. Like as if it could get any better than this. Well done, Forge. Rogue also calls attention to Colossus's new outfit in this issue, but is it worth calling attention to? Nothing about this is an upgrade from his previous costume. Sure, I like how slinky it is, but I actually think it's pretty bland. The front is just a deeply V-cut muscle shirt, and the solid red gives it no dimension at all. Back to the drawing board, Peter. I'm also going to give a little shout out to the club kids in this issue. Nick runs a stylish club, and no one should be all dressed up without being seen, so here you go, ladies. This is your moment. One of them looks like a weird Storm Cyclops mashup with a mohawk and a visor and stuff, and the other one kind of looks like a dredged up Rogue, but hey, whatever gets you past the coat check, lady.
Ads.
This issue I'm highlighting the Slam Dunker ad. It's another ad that was featured in the classified style ad pages where there are just so many goodies to choose from, but this incredible artwork is really what got my attention. Here's what the ad says. Be a slam dunker, stuff shots, be a real elevator man. Amazing basketball booklet increases jumping ability 6 inches in 6 weeks. Free sports action poster with winner's secret. Bonus 7 golden rules that can help you make the team. $2.95. Wow, that's a lot of promises. 6 inches in 6 weeks? 7 golden rules? A free sports action poster? There's no money back guarantee here, so I guess they're relying on at least one of these things to provide satisfaction for that nearly $3 cost. I did a Google hunt on the address to see what's there now, and while it definitely is just a cul-de-sac neighborhood, it looks like there is a basketball net at the house, so who knows? Maybe this promise to grow your basketball skills really is a slam dunk investment.
X-Mail.
This week, it's the lovebirds in the editorial office, Cyclops and Madeline. They are thanking everyone for the letters they received, wishing them well on their wedding, but not everyone feels so thrilled about it. There's a lot of hate in this letters page for the wedding. If it wasn't apparent that Jean Grey was a fan favorite before, the timeliness of her death with this sort of shotgun wedding really hammers home that the fans aren't super accepting of Miss Pryor yet. Someone even writes in to swear off reading books ever again because the death of Jean Grey promotes a loveless ideal. Ugh, don't read so much into it, you guys. The letter I'm electing to highlight from this issue is a sweet one. It's a poem that was written to Jean by Melissa Cook of Bethel Spring, Tennessee. She's not swearing off the book or getting angry about a fictional character's death. She's just here to give Jean a nice little ode and acknowledge that life goes on. Here's what Melissa had to say. Dear Jean, our lives touched we thought forever, but that was not fate's plan. You died and I was supposed to go on and live my allotted span. But I couldn't let go and in my way joined you in death. I denied reality and prayed for a miracle with every breath. But now I can say goodbye, acceptance did finally arrive. Now I know there's life after death for those who are alive. Ah, it's so sweet. Neither Cyclops nor Madeline choose to comment on this poem to Jean, but still, so sweet. Well, that's it for this one. Thanks for tuning in. You can follow me on any of my social media platforms for a varied assortment of X content, or check out my website, greatxmentations.com. This review and all my other Uncanny X-Men reviews can be found on my YouTube page in a playlist for your viewing pleasure as well. Please let me know what you thought of this issue, and feel free to argue with me in the comment section about it. Thanks again, and come back soon for more Great X-Mentations.